Hey there, welcome to the archives. So I wanted to do a quick video. This one is called Self-Sovereignty and Shame. And so yesterday morning, someone asked me, what do you think is the opposite of shame? And I got really excited thinking about the answer in my response. And then when I wrapped up the call, I realized that I posted a video already. Maybe not a video, but I have talked about sovereignty and shame. And I realize I have to be specific that I'm speaking here of self-sovereignty, not sovereignty in terms of the state. That's not what this is about. But I initially did the blog on February 8th of 2022. It was updated again on November 2002. No, 2002. November 2022. And so this one, I went back and it's a little bit long, so I'm going to break it up into a couple chunks. This first one, I'm just going to speak specifically around sovereignty, why I think it's the opposite of shame. I have another blog posted up on there. But when I say sovereignty here, I'm speaking of specifically self-sovereignty, which includes the power, self-control, and the authority over our own lives. A lot of my energetic work lately is looking at healing shame, and learning to transmute it into an energetic and spiritual power. And so when they say like knowledge is power, taking this idea of knowledge and the insights that come with self-reflection and the introspection that shame can provide us can be really powerful. And not in like a material political sense, which begs the question, why invest in this if it doesn't result in any sort of material or physical liberation, right? Because that makes sense. We are trying to liberate ourselves in a way where we have physical, where we're physically free, not just like intellectually or emotions. Like, what is that going to do for us if we're still being murdered by the state, if we're still being killed, if people can't even go to a doorbell, going to pick up their siblings without being shot? Like, what does any of this emotions talk have anything to do with any of this, right? And I completely get that as well too. So, like I said, I'm going to get more into it in another blog. This one I want to talk about how Jack Habersan talks about pride as the opposite of shame. I don't disagree. I do think that pride, a sense of being proud of yourself, it is a counterpart. It's not a counterpart, but like it is an opposite in some way. I just think that pride doesn't go all the way there, mostly because it's like this egoic quest that brings us right back to shame, or rather, it becomes a motivation for avoiding shame, right? The true opposite of shame, I think, cannot fear shame or make it, or even want to deviate from it so much, because it knows that it's not shame. Right? If you already know that you cannot be innately shameful, then there's nothing to run from or to hide, or there's no point in evading it, because you yourself know there is this surety, there is this inner knowing that you are not shame, you are not a mistake. But I think sometimes what ends up happening is people do feel that shame, and then they work really hard to be proud of themselves. And it can be superficial, or it can be more so this fear of people seeing you as shameful, so then you have to perform like you're really confident. And then what we end up doing is this hyper confidence, hyper superiority that's actually rooted in shame. And so that's where I think pride can get really sticky. And I think Jack Habersan talks about this as well too, when he is talking about the gay conference, right? And saying like the white gay men weren't able to negotiate their shame the same way as the black and people of color, gay people in the conference, because they had a self-consciousness. There was this introspection that they were able to engage in, right? So it's not that they were evading shame and not looking at it. They were going into it. There was a consciousness building exercise practice that was happening that made that sense of pride look very differently than how he was saying that the white gay men were exhibiting pride, for instance. And so I think without that lack of critical consciousness, it becomes really, I don't think it's actually pride. It's superiority that's masking right, as being confident. And I've done that, right? Sometimes people will be like, oh, she's really confident, but like I was actually really insecure, and I could still be very insecure. That's not to say that both of them are mutually exclusive, but I think that's where pride doesn't go far enough. I've also seen some of the most prideful people that are in deep shame, right? Myself included. People will perform as confident, like I said, they'll act like they're really proud of themselves, but deep down, it's not really authentic. It's done from a place of fear of not being seen as shameful, right? And so for this reason, I don't think that pride goes far enough as being the opposite of shame. It's a start, 100%, but it has to be anchored in something deeper, something that's more innate, more intuitive. Brene Brown has said that the opposite or the antidote to shame is empathy, vulnerability, and creativity. Again, I don't disagree with that. I do agree. I also think that these are byproducts of something that deeper that anchors us, right? Empathy is a choice. As is vulnerability. I choose to be vulnerable. It has to be really intentional, right? Some people might innately be more vulnerable than others. Some people might be more empathetic, but innately, at the end of the day, it is a choice, right? Creativity is innate, but again, there is this choice. There's something that can be taught. It can be learned. It's something we can grow. And so, in order to exude or exhibit these things, we have to be sure of who we are. Right? We have to know who we are in order to have pride in who we are. We have to be autonomous enough to not be threatened by vulnerability. We have to be sovereign enough in our own knowing that we are safe to create creatively. And so for me, this means that we need self-sovereignty. We need autonomy. We need self-determination. Right? Not to say that these are standalones or that we then stand alone, we're independent of everybody else, we just have all of this power that we're wielding within ourselves. That's not it, right? Far from it. In order to be sovereign, that sovereignty, self-sovereignty is what moves you into interdependence, right? You can have indigenous community sovereignty. It's often looked at as like tribal, communal, state. Like we are sovereign nations, right? We can run our own politics. We can take care of our own communities. We don't need settlers to be invading in our everyday lives. That's what I mean by self-sovereignty. I am a sovereign human being. I know I am proud of who I am. I'm not feeling ashamed because I know that this shame is not mine innately. You're projecting that onto me, right? And from that place, then I can have this sense of pride, right? I can stand up a little bit taller. I can be a little bit more empathetic because I'm not threatened by that, right? I don't care to look weak because I know I'm not weak. It's this really innate, intuitive thing. It's from authentic. The word authentic, some people don't like it, but it's just you're not threatened. You're not shaken by what others are saying. So again, I connect shame with Mbembe's necropolitics and Lauren Berlant's slow death. This is themes I'm thinking about the last few days. The previous post talked about it, and the next couple of posts will also talk about it as I make sense of shame in the mind body, and how it contributes to like our ill health, dying bodies. We don't even really know, or we don't account for it, right? Like literally, shame can shrivel us. It makes us small. It makes us shrink. It makes us play small. It limits us. It limits our capacity. It's immobilizing. And so in sovereignty, we're able to counter that, right? And that's a good thing. That could be really revolutionary because you're not that you're not dying the same way, but you're able to shift, you're able to reframe it. And so if we are to reverse engineer and go back and turn things around, like what would that look like, right? I think it would look like going back to self-sovereignty, being self-sustainable. Again, that's not to say that you need to be independent and to do everything by yourself. But there needs to be this kind of going back to Octavia Butler, right? They were really working on becoming a self-sustainable community because they knew they couldn't depend on the government. They had to learn to grow their own foods. They had to learn to build their own homes. They created a community that was not dependent on the government. And that's what I mean by self-sustainability, right? Not an individual self-sustainability, but a knowing that no one is coming to save you. Again, that's not to say that we don't need community, but who are we relying on to save us? Often it is state, it is people in positions of power. And so I really want to emphasize here this idea of self-determination, of justice. These are, again, themes that Octavia Butler points to, specifically Lauren Olamina and Earthseed. And so for me, working with energetic shame, it's a way to attain some semblance of self-sovereignty, right? It's to regain some sort of control, some sort of power, right? The word power is really important here in sovereignty. And I don't like the idea of controlling our emotions, because it's a misnomer. You can't actually control your emotions in the way that we think it is. Emotions don't like to be controlled, especially the negative ones. The more you try to control it, the more it actually controls you. Um, and and I mean this in terms of, like, not like when you try to repress your rage or your anger, that makes you more angry. You have to find a way in order to channel that, whether it be creatively, cry, smash things, scream. Like you trying to control and keep in your rage and your anger is not. It's actually going to make you more angry. And so that's what I mean by control there. We have to step outside of everything we know and everything we've been taught, because often what we've been taught is not the most quote unquote productive. It's not the healthiest way. It's just to tuck away emotions, be ashamed of it, don't talk about it, don't tap into it. They're the enemies, and I don't think that's the case. And so, and again, it's also important to talk about shame. Brene Brown says that you have to speak about your shame. You have to talk about it. I did try that, right? And it doesn't always work best for Black women. Dr. Yazid was talking about that. Like, it did talk, as a Black woman, people will use your shame stories against you, right? I couldn't control the types of people I shared my shame stories with. It spread like wildfire, right? When you're a Black woman, people will laugh at your shame. There isn't that same level of empathy. And so, of course, it's important to speak your shame, to talk about it to people you trust, to give life to it. And also, like, shame is not the enemy here, is what I wanted to say. Like fear, it can be really nurturing. It could teach us a lot of lessons. That's at least what the literature says, right? It says that shame could be a moral compass. It could be consciousness raising. It can be really good for self-reflection. It's best that we work best. It's best we work with shame as an ally rather than an enemy. But that meditation, that self-reflection, that mindfulness, it takes us into other worlds, right? If we know where to go, if we know how to access it, we have this like spirit and ancestral wisdom and guidance that permits us to gain new knowledges that can actually be really beneficial. And so that's all I wanted to say, is just thinking about sovereignty and shame as something that is really liberatory, it's really freeing, rather than being controlled by others, rather than being stuck in power dynamics, or being dominated. Once we're able to see that we are sovereign beings, that really shifts the mind frame of how we interact with shame. And so if this resonates, great, awesome, pass it on. If it doesn't, that's okay too. Like, subscribe, or consider making a donation on PayPal at D Archives. Okay, so until next time, in solidarity.